Someday, when history presses fingers to keys to tell our story, this chapter might be called Easter Lockdown. 2020, the year that the virus caused global concern among politicians who worried that we, too stupid and in love with each other for our own good, would risk our lives to gather on Easter in large numbers. So emergency powers were enacted around the world. Here, Ontarians were prohibited from gathering in groups larger than 5. In Ireland, you could be hit by a 2,500-pound fine if you leave the house for anything other than legal, medical, family obligation, or essential services. In São Paulo, Brazil, road blockades ban outsiders from traveling into the city for this weekend. The German police have been patrolling the autobahns to make sure vehicle plates correspond with the local areas that they are driving through. In France, 160,000 police and gendarmes have been deployed to make sure that people stay home this Easter weekend. One French mayor even banned sitting on city benches. And it isn't just for Easter. The Israeli government imposed a full curfew on its people from Wednesday to Thursday morning, covering the Jewish Passover holiday. No doubt, we will be in lockdown during Ramadan, which begins in 11 days. And some churches talked about not celebrating Easter at all this year, or at least until the churches were open again. Did they really think a lockdown could keep Easter from happening? Sure. The trumpets were pre-recorded, the Easter bunnies and stores with bonnets were closed, and fresh-cut lilies have to wait for another time, but none of that was ever in the Easter bargain. God never promised us fanfare and overflowing pews. This Easter, Western triumphalism, along with our Savior, has died, and in its place are remnants of our faith, holy remnants, the kind of scraps that God is always using to make something new. Indeed, it is exactly times like this when we are most receptive to God's Easter. The Romans knew it. They were the first to try and lock down Easter. 2 Roman guards, no doubt who drew the short straws, were deployed to guard the entrance to Jesus' tomb on the off chance that Jesus' promise to rise again would come true. They were pretty twitchy by the end of the graveyard shift, so when the earthquake and the angel in the blinding white happened, they decided not to wait around for Jesus to rise from the dead. Their senses were so overloaded that their brains shut down the oxygen supply, and they fainted. What a strange defense mechanism we humans have. And maybe the women wanted to run or faint too, but grief dulled their senses and their reflexes. Fearfully, they had plodded their way to the tomb that morning, each woman lost in her own thoughts, stunned by the week's events. How could this have happened? One minute we were celebrating, the next the crowds were shouting, "Crucify him!" I don't understand. Life turned upside down. The disciples were on the run, in denial of who they belonged to, for fear that their loyalty to Christ would tie their fate to the cross, which of course it would and still does. They were scattered, separated from one another, waiting in locked rooms for the pall of death to pass over. That first Easter was a lockdown Easter too. Which is why "don't be afraid" is repeated at least twice in the span of a minute. First by the angel and then by Christ. The angel says to Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, "Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He's not here. He's risen. Go and tell your disciples he is going ahead of them to Galilee, and there you will see him." And this might be my favorite part of the Easter story. Because immediately after, the women turn and they run right into Jesus. It's as if he just couldn't wait. I know, I told the angels that I'd catch up with you in Galilee, but Mary, how could I leave you alone at a time like this? And herein is the heart of the gospel truth, right in that moment. When Jesus says, don't be afraid, he's not offering us the assurance that nothing can go wrong, because things very often do go wrong. Rather, it's the assurance that whatever may happen to us, whatever the day may hold, God is with us and for us at all times. Sorrows and joys, triumphs, tragedies, losses, gains, fears, scarcity, peace, plenty, or COVID. God is present. And nothing we can encounter will ever be stronger than God's love. Grace cannot be quarantined. God's love cannot be in lockdown. Christ has risen, and so must we. And so as we turn and we stumble away from the tombs to tell others still shaky from our long nights of grief and confusion, still uncertain about what all this could possibly mean for us, we hear the risen Christ calling our name, saying, do not be afraid. I am with you. I will go ahead of you. Easter has come. And what comes next for the women and the disciples wasn't easy. And what comes next for us won't be either. In every age, God calls the disciples through Jesus, calling us all by name, picking up the pieces of our tattered faith and inviting us to change the world through God's love. Why would this Easter be any different? Go, share the good news. There is no lockdown on love, no quarantine on grace. Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Amen.